Good evening and welcome to the Right Side. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this is the show where we talk about today's news, views, and trends from an admittedly conservative perspective. This evening, I'm joined by two guests, and we're going to be explaining a little bit about transportation and how it can be done more cost-effectively as well as more safely here in the Bay Area, and look at some ways that we might restructure the current scenario and Metropolitan Transportation Commission specifically in order to get better bang for our tax-paying dollar. This evening, I'm joined by Bob Feinbaum as well as Jerry Cauthen, and we're going to get into a little bit about your backgrounds first, and we'll start with Bob. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in transportation activism.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here. And I am a social scientist by training, and by profession, an environmental consultant. And a number of years ago, I was actually a consultant for the MTC on the BART Impact Project, which studied what would happen and what the results of the implementation of BART would be. And I've been involved in a number of environmental issues, and just recently I became involved with Jerry in an organization called Save Muni over in San Francisco, which is attempting to improve the Muni transit system. Okay. And recently, together with Jerry, we formed the Bay Area Transportation Working Group, which is aimed at improving regional transportation decisions.
Okay, great. And just for kicks, tell me where you would apply a label politically. I mean, do you consider yourself very conservative, very liberal, somewhere in the middle?
I would consider myself an independent.
Okay.
And independent in the sense that I like to think for myself and to come down on issues that relate to my values.
Well, one of the reasons I ask is that, you know, here on the show, we do say it's a conservative-oriented show, but we have people who consider themselves very liberal, sometimes very conservative, sometimes more libertarian types. And just what's interesting to me is this is a topic that I think is applicable universally, and one where we can work together regardless of political stripe to get something effective done. And that's the only reason I ask.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. I think whether you're Tea Party or Green Party, you have an interest in seeing that your transportation dollars are spent wisely, and they're not being spent wisely in the Bay Area at the present time.
Okay, great. And so, Jerry, tell us a little bit about your background.
I started out not really having much feel for transportation at all. When I graduated from Berkeley as a civil engineer, I was doing hydraulic design, and I went to Germany, actually, and went to work for the Corps and was doing military design and construction. But while I was in Europe for 3 years, I got to see how it could work very, very well. How the public transit systems, the rail systems, the connecting bus systems, even the bicycle systems were working well, and things, and that, I won't say Europe has got a lot that we want to emulate, but in that sense of planning their infrastructure intelligently, they did it. So I came back here to determine I was going to get in the field.
Right. After
a certain amount of time back in hydraulics, I managed to get transferred to doing Muni projects, and so that was as a professional about 1970. Okay. And then for that 10 years, I worked for Muni putting their subway system online. I ended up as a chief project manager there. Then I worked for private industry for about 17 years, continuing to do transportation projects. But through this time, I became also an activist. Okay. Because in contrast to Europe, we don't have the kind of planning and central intelligence setting the stage here in this region that they have elsewhere in the world. I know it's possible. I've seen it, and that's really what drives both Bob and I and what we're trying to do.
Okay. And so the important point about both of your backgrounds is that you guys aren't just a couple of guys spouting off that you're ticked off that BART doesn't run efficiently. You actually have a background in transportation. You've seen some different ways that things could be done. You've seen the way that they are done, and you're not happy.
Correct.
That's right. That's right.
So there are a lot of different topics that we could cover, and you both threatened me that we could be here for several hours talking about transportation, but at the same time, I know that there are a couple of projects that you're particularly passionate about because they exemplify what's wrong with some of the solutions that were being presented, and taxpayer dollars are not being spent wisely. And one of them that we talked about before the show was the Oakland Connector. And Bob, this is a particular passion point for you. Tell us why it frustrates you.
Well, it does because this is the connector between the Coliseum BART station and the Oakland Airport. And currently, there's a private shuttle service which runs between the 2 points. It stops at a number of locations along Hegenberger Road, which is the road that leads to the airport.
Right.
And it costs $2. It's a pretty good service. Not perfect, but pretty good service. The current plan, and which is being implemented, unfortunately, is this BART airport connector. And what it is it's an elevated train which runs between the Coliseum BART station and the Oakland Airport. Problem is, it costs $500 million. And the ridership is not going to be any much greater than the bus that is currently running between the 2 points. Plus, AC Transit, which is our local transit system there, said they could do a better, what would really be a better service in terms of picking up people locally for about $100 million. So basically, they're spending $500 million to do a worse job than a system for $100 million would have done. And the kicker in this is that the application went into the federal government to fund the Oakland Airport connector.
Okay.
They looked at the project, they refused to fund it. And so the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, the agency that I think we're going to talk about restructuring later on, picked up the ball, found money somewhere, and is now funding that $500 million project, which is only about half completed at the present time. So it's really a misallocation of resources for a project that's not really going to serve much better than the current shuttle services.
But at least the cost is going to be lower for the riders, right? Instead of
No,
$2,
no, no.
it's going to be
$6.
Each way.
each way.
$6 each way. So instead of $2, you're going to pay $6. And it's since it's an elevated rail system, it's not going to be able to stop at the various locations. And that's incidentally one of the reasons why the federal government opted out of it, because they opted out of it under what's called Title VI, which said that since it's a largely minority community that it's going through, it's not going to serve the community well, and therefore they declined to fund it. As I say, MTC was eager to come in, pick up the ball, and go with the funding on this.
So worse service, more expensive, serves fewer people who actually need the transportation provided to them, and they fund it anyway.
Yes, and their argument is that the Oakland Airport is going to grow so enormously that there's going to be so much traffic that's coming in on BART that the system eventually will gather riders, but that's not what they told the federal government. They actually declared ridership, which was not very impressive.
And so in addition to all of that, because it's not serving the community that it's actually running through, they'll probably still have to run the buses?
One would think so.
Boondoggle of the 9th degree.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. And so, Jerry, one of the things that you've talked about being particularly passionate about is the Doyle Drive project. Right. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's just really fascinating to me, what's happened there. It was originally a $420 million project to seismically upgrade the original roadway, which extends from the Marina District in San Francisco to the Golden Gate Bridge. That was a legitimate seismic plan that Caltrans had.
Okay.
Now, before I get into what happened, I want to tell you what happened just to the north of there. The Golden Gate Bridge District, which is one of the better run commissions in this region, quietly has seismically upgraded the Golden Gate Bridge with very little fanfare. The traffic has never been interrupted. There's been not a lot of publicity, but they are far ahead of everybody else when it comes to seismically upgraded that bridge, doing some of the same things that are occurring on the east span today and this Doyle Drive section, which is partly elevated, the same kind of a problem. So the bridge district handled it with what I think was a lot of aplomb and practicality. this other section, which is 1.3 miles long, was taken over by the city and county of San Francisco, and particularly its county transportation authority. They decided that seismic upgrading wasn't enough. They had to develop a beautiful, environmentally pure freeway through the Presidio of San Francisco, which is a national park. So the original roadway was 68 feet wide. The new roadway will be 148 feet wide, so it's over twice as wide. And the price has gone from $420 million, which was the voters voted for this in November of 2003. That's not that long ago, 8 years ago. It went from 420, the current price, $2 billion. So it's gone up 5 times, 5-fold. And for that, you get a freeway. It probably takes you 60 seconds to go through that little section from the Golden Gate Bridge to the city. You flash by, and maybe someday there'll be some landscaping in the median. But other than that, you have no change. There's no additional capacity. There are no more lanes. You can't take any more traffic. They put in a divider, which makes it safer, and that was going to be part of the original plan. That was part of the $420 million plan, to put in a divider to keep people from having head-on collisions. But they've taken this thing, one individual and his landscaper got, as far as I'm concerned, sugar plums in their eyes, and decided to build a monument through there, disregarding the Presidio and disregarding the cost, and that's what we have today. It's being built. Unfortunately, it's being built.
5 times as much as the taxpayers voted on.
Right.
No additional capacity.
No capacity. It's taken a lot of the Presidio forest. The new interchange is so enormous, they've cut out hundreds of trees to make room for this enormous interchange right in the Presidio.
But doesn't taking out trees increase our carbon or decrease our carbon offsets and so on?
Yeah. Plus the construction does, of course.
Oh
yeah.
man, so worse for the environment, worse for the taxpayers, but a nice 60-second display for the builders.
Although I have to say, I have a very good friend who lives in Sausalito, and he makes that trip very frequently. He says he cannot understand why they did this. He just is astounded by it. Just by because it really isn't that monumental even today, even for the driver. It was just a dream that ran aplomb. And MTC's role in this, they weren't the sponsors of it, the local sponsors, but they supported it and fought for it, not only in the state and federal government offices, but they also went over to Marin County and twisted arms over there and made the people in Marin and Sonoma County pay some of that money on threat of if you don't play ball with us now, you may have some trouble with us later. So they have that kind of authority where they can put pressure on groups when they want to behind some pet project like this one.
So in other words, you fund our project, even if it's not in your best interest, or we'll make sure you don't get some of the state and federal funding that may be coming your way.
That's what we've heard from Marin County representatives who were approached by that, and some supervisors that were approached more or less on that basis. I'm sure it's very polite, but that was the message. So
is extortion part of their mantra or part of their assignment in the development of MTC?
No, not actually. Their assignment is to coordinate transportation projects for the Bay Area, and implicitly so that all of us can move around more easily, and so that perhaps even we can move around less expensively. That's what they're charged with. And unfortunately, they haven't succeeded at it because you may remember, Chris, that there was a study that came out of a university recently, which showed that the Bay Area was the second most congested region in the nation, tied with Los Angeles. And I think every driver in the 9 Bay Area counties can attest to that. We've also uncovered some figures, not too hard to do, from NTC itself, which shows that transit ridership has been level for the past 30 years. It hasn't gone up, yet the Bay Area population has gone up. So the question that we start with is, well, what exactly are they doing to fulfill their mandate? If traffic is worse and transit ridership is not up, then how are they spending the billions of dollars that they have spent over the past 25 years, and what's the effect been? And we come to the answer that perhaps there's a need for restructuring MTC so that it can better fulfill its mission.
Okay. Would you define or add any definition to Bob's?
I put it a little bit pretty close, but I would say that the original idea of MTC was to assert some type of a regional perspective to make sure that the local jurisdictions didn't waste their money, or let's say didn't fail to coordinate with their neighbors. And you've got San Francisco County doing something that might conflict with something San Mateo County. The original director of MTC was a fellow with a sense of humor, didn't take him too seriously, but he had a real mission to sell regionalism in a soft way, not impose it, but to convince people there was a need for it, which I think both Bob and I agree there is a need for some kind of regional entry into the situation at times. When there's truly a regional problem, maybe MTC's got a role. The problem is, instead of fulfilling the function that it was expected to do, it very soon got into a situation of horse trading, where they would go to one jurisdiction who had a pet project to sell, and they'd say, okay, we'll support you, but in exchange for that, you've got to support, let's say it's San Jose's got some awful thing they want to do. San Francisco got something not a lot better. They make sure that the two entities, the two local entities agree, and then they cross this throughout the region, and then they're able to go to the federal government and the state government and say, good news, folks, we have a plan that is a regional plan, everybody buys into it, and they get the funding, and then they proceed to ladle out the billions of dollars to these pet projects. And as a result of this failure to fulfill the real problem of correct regional planning, not imposition, but doing things to make it work better in coordination with everything else, they end up with what Bob has just said, a flat, totally flat transit ridership trend at the same time with a rising population trend and a rising total vehicle travel trend. Flat transit, that's failure. It's an absolute proof that they haven't done what they set out to do, despite all these tens of billions of dollars wasted, and we're very angry about this.
Right.
We're trying to do something about it.
And so, but you've also used a term, both of you have, that will make our viewers angry, and that's regionalism. We need to maybe spend a minute on this. When you're talking about MTC having a regional role, is it more of, along the lines of having MTC be kind of a referee or arbitrator between the jurisdictions and making sure that the plans that these jurisdictions have aren't going to be in conflict or going to make it harder on others in the area, kind of a sounding board, or the model that it's taken on of more regional centralized planning and being forced down through things like the One Bay Area plan?
No, we're not. I'm certainly not for that One Bay Area plan at all, not even close to it. And you didn't ask me my political leanings. I'm an independent also, but I lean toward suspicion of large government and large government waste and arrogance and imposition, a paternalistic attitude. I'd rather see it local. I'd rather see it smaller and more efficient. But I think that what they should have done is, number one, they should have, if they're going to nudge the locals, they should have said, look, before we try to force anybody to change his driving, his motoring habits, his travel habits, let's give them an alternative that works.
Right.
So let's make sure that when San Francisco develops something, it's optimized, and make sure that AC Transit is its routing is restructured so that it works correctly.
Right.
Right now, the only people that ride it are the transit dependent. That isn't a very good motif. Now, maybe a nudge from a mature and not an arrogant, but a mature regional organization could help convince, let's say, AC or BART or Muni to do things a little bit better without imposing, just explaining. That's what leadership's about. It's not by coming in and saying we're going to do this,
right.
And it's certainly not by inconveniencing a motorist who's got nothing but a car to get him around without spending all day getting somewhere. So
right.
That's my feeling about it.
Right. And what's interesting is they don't look at ways of saving money or looking at, as with the Oakland connector, we have something that's working, why damage it? And you talk about AC Transit, that's a hot button for me. When you look at 20% of the operating costs being covered by fares, the rest of it's subsidized from somewhere, and they're often running empty buses everywhere where the transit dependency is not as high.
Right.
And so why not run something, a shuttle type bus? 14 seats are empty, are less expensive to run than 80 empty seats, and it has a smaller carbon footprint. So there are
There's
wins
many
all the way
things.
around.
Sorry.
But it's about reevaluating, and actually, once they've proposed these things, doing a post-mortem and saying, hey, did we hit our goals in the first place or not?
Well, one of the big failures is the alternative analysis. I think we talked about that. An alternative analysis is very important if you're going to spend a lot of money, is to figure out, well, I could do nothing, and that'll cost me so-and-so, and then I can take alternative 1, 2, and 3 and compare them. They don't really do those in a bona fide way, and that means that they find a pet idea that somebody wants who's got influence. That idea is promoted. There's really no competition because they keep the viable alternatives out of the discussion, and that's where things start to go wrong right there.
Okay. Well, you have plans. If you could change the world, you would restructure MTC. We've got a couple minutes left. Tell me how you guys would go about it.
Well, yes, we would. And we'd stress more that coordination function, because what our idea is would be to have MTC look at the regional aspects as it should, but to devolve some of the localized issues back to district commissions. So our idea is as follows, just very briefly. Currently, each county has what's called a congestion management agency, CMA, and that is supposed to do what the term says, manage congestion, basically diminish congestion so that people can have better alternatives to get around. They're not doing a very good job. So our thought is to integrate within a structure of MTC a coordinating function at the center, and then district commissions which would take the localized issues and deal with them so that people at the local areas can be more involved in their own planning and their own implementation of projects. Because right now, MTC holds its meetings in Oakland. If you're from Napa or you're from Santa Clara, it's unlikely that you as a citizen are going to go. In fact, even if you're a commissioner, you may not go. So if we devolved some of that localized issues back to district commissions, one in Santa Clara would deal with VTA and with issues that are in Santa Clara. One in Napa would deal with those issues. That would make a lot more sense and leave to MTC the coordination so that there would be an overlap of service that would allow people to get from one area to the other.
Okay. We're out of time for now. We need to take a quick break for a word from our sponsor, but if you hold on for just a moment, we'll be right back with you. And now, a word from our underwriter, the Conservative Forum.
Say, well, I say I'm a constitutional law attorney. They say, oh, really? What kind of constitutional law attorney? I say, well, I'm the true kind, the kind that believe that the Constitution is what the Constitution says and what it was intended to say. Anything beyond that is tyranny and should not be allowed.
So it's come to this, my friends. You ready the second American Revolution against a ruling class that simply lectures but does not listen or defend the American people. It is government versus the people. Am I right? Yes. Look at the Electoral College example, right? A leftist popular challenge to states' rights. You think the founders weren't brilliant people? Did they not know what they were doing by carefully calibrating to get the small states and the big states to come together? Why does Wyoming get 2 senators in California? Actually, I'd rather have Wyoming's 2 senators.
Welcome back to The Right Side. That was a word from our underwriter, the Conservative Forum. And in addition to sponsoring the show, one of the things that they're best known for is their speaker series, which takes place typically the first Tuesday of each month at 432 Steerlin Road here in Mountain View, about 3 minutes from here, at the IFES Portuguese Hall. Tonight, they will be hosting Ying Ma, author of Chinese Girl in the City, or in the Ghetto, and the program starts at 7. In July, Debbie Bacigalupi will be speaking on July 9th as opposed to the first Tuesday of the month, just because of the 4th of July holiday being that week. She's a former congressional candidate and also a previous guest on the show. In August, Steve Forbes, yes, that's Steve Forbes, will be speaking with his co-author of the Freedom Manifesto, and so we hope that you'll be able to join us at one of those events. You can find out more at theconservativeforum.com. In closing, I wanted to just give Jerry one last chance to include any other information you wanted to, about 30 seconds worth.
Just a couple more words about the MTC changes we see as one good way of improving things. Any large company tends to have district offices because they need to be a little closer to their consumers. MTC is an enormous operation. It goes from the southern part of San Jose clear up to Sonoma. That's about 150 miles or more. Actually, it's more than that. So it makes it very difficult for people to come to meetings, as Bob said, and it certainly makes it difficult for a constituency to keep track, because if you pay attention, you're likely going to hear something about Napa, even though you live in Santa Clara. Okay. So by putting out some district offices closer to the people, you bring that planning down where it is, right there where it needs to be.
Okay.
And that's the direction we're taking.
Well, thank you for sharing your passion this evening, gentlemen. We're going to share with the audience your contact information so they can reach out to you about the working group as well, if they have additional questions. And again, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much. This has been The Right Side, and I've been your host, Chris Pareja. We look forward to seeing you in person or on the show again sometime soon. Have a great night.